In 2015, I believe, DM got a grant from EPA to do a study of the impact of highway emissions on neighborhoods in the Providence area. We already knew pretty much that we had a kind of a worst case site already that's still there. That's right over near the Veterans Memorial Auditorium, right on the side of the road. It's like 5 feet from the road, and we were getting very high levels of a number of pollutants there. But that wasn't really representing what people were exposed to, because it's right next to the highway. It's in an area that's not really accessible to the public, and it's the highest volume traffic area in the state. So we wanted to look more at what people were actually being exposed to at areas, like at sensitive receptors. So that'd be schools, daycares, parks, so forth, places where people are. So with this funding from EPA, we decided we had air monitors at 5 sites along I-95. They're all pretty much all close to the daycares, parks, or the health center. We did monitoring, pretty extensive monitoring for 1 year period beginning in April 2017. It actually took a long time to get the sites going. And then also at the same time we used some portable equipment to look at spatial variation. So to look at, as you move away from the highway, how does it change with distance? So there were 2 pollutants that got measured continuously. One is black carbon, which is an indicator of diesel particulate matter. Diesel exhaust also, black carbon itself isn't as toxic as some of the other components, but it's an indicator. It's something we can measure pretty easily. So it's an indicator. Diesel exhaust also has a number of other very highly toxic substances. And then also we measured particle count. Particle count is a measure of ultrafine particles. It counts actually all the particles are there, but there's so many more of these like really, really small particles that can go very deep in your body and pretty much get transferred throughout your body that it's essentially measuring particle count is essentially measuring ultrafine particles. And these pollutants are linked to a variety of health effects, obviously respiratory effects, but also cardiac effects and also some neurological effects. And then diesel particulate matter is also linked to lung cancer. And then children and people with asthma or other lung conditions are particularly susceptible to those effects. So we also measured volatile organic compounds, which is kind of solvents, those kind of more substances that kind of evaporate into the air. Those are measured in a different way, where the others are measured continuously, so you're getting a measurement every few minutes. This is measured by collecting a sample in a canister every 6th day at each site for 24 hours. So it's more of an average over a day. It measures, I think, 40-some pollutants altogether, but we focused on some of the ones that are associated with motor vehicles, particularly ones that are quite toxic, like benzene and 1,3-butadiene, which are human carcinogens, and also toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylenes, which are components of gasoline, and also acrolein, which is probably the thing that makes up almost all of that respiratory risk that you showed in your pictures. And that comes from the combustion, it's in the exhaust from vehicles and other combustion products. So we had the 5 sites that we had. One is Vernon Street, Pawtucket, it's a site that we have anyway, but we expanded it to measure more things. It's right next to the highway, right at the School Street exit. Then Bay Street, Providence, which is right at the merge of where like 195 comes into 95 South. And it's mostly, right around it, it's mostly commercial, industrial, but there's about a block away, there's a daycare center. Part of the reason that we picked it actually is that we really wanted to be at the soccer field at Meeting Street School, which is maybe about a quarter mile down the 95 from there, but we weren't able to get permission. So there's no exit or entrances to the highway between those two, so we thought that this would be a reasonable representation of what people might be exposed to there. There are some differences, but that was part of the reason. And then the Chafee Health Center, the Providence Health Center, the Chafee Center, which is on the other side of the highway, at the Thurbers Ave exit, right sort of off Eddy Street. And then Niagara Street, which is just sort of north of the Elmwood Ave exit. It's also to the west of the highway, as is Bay Street. And it's right near residences, level with the highway. Right behind it is where Macaulay Village is, and a bunch of parks and other facilities. And then we use the near road site that I mentioned before, that's right near the VMA. That's kind of the worst case site. This is kind of a comparison. This map, this doesn't show the Pawtucket one, but it shows the other one. So that the Niagara is the one that's farthest south. This is the Providence Health Center on that, the east side of the highway. Bay Street's over here, and then the near road site is right here in the middle. So when we looked at benzene, because we're collecting over a 24-hour period for those, sometimes the wind shifts during the day, or you're not sure exactly why it might be higher one day or the other. But we looked at days that there were mostly, the wind was pretty consistently either from the east or from the west, or had either pretty consistently an easterly component or westerly component. When it's from the east, the Niagara site would be downwind. When it's from the west, the health center site would be downwind. And you can see that on almost all of these days that it was east, the Niagara site was higher benzene, and the reverse was true, and the ones were from the west. So there's definitely a signal from the highway on the benzene levels. And benzene is a known human carcinogen. It's known to cause leukemia. So that was pretty conclusive. And it's very similar with 1,3-butadiene, which is also a known human carcinogen. On the days of the east, Niagara was higher and just about every day, and the reverse was true when it was west. The Providence Health Center was downwind. And I do want to mention that the health center site is actually not level with the highway. At that point, there's a pretty stiff, straight down drop that goes from there from the highway down to the health center. And we weren't actually sure how much of an impact we were going to see in the highway. So this was something we were a little surprised that we saw as definite an imprint from the highway when the wind was from that direction. But we did, so. Okay. And then I wanted to make the point that even though we have this sort of clear impact from the highway, that in all the urban sites, including the urban league site, which is close to here, just down the street, Prairie Ave, the levels of both benzene and 1,3-butadiene are a lot higher than that suburban and rural monitors. So this is the near road site, the one that's right next to the highway, it's real high. These are the ones, the other 4 study sites. This is the urban league site, which is a little bit lower, but still kind of elevated. And then this is a site in East Providence, which is a suburban site. And this is a site at Elm Jones, which is rural. So that pretty much all the time, if you're living in the city, you're getting more of an exposure to toxics from cars, whether or not, or from vehicles, whether you're not near the highway. But if you're near the highway, you're getting this extra dose. The same was true with 1,3-butadiene. So black carbon and particle count gave us a lot more data to play with, because you're basically getting a data point like every 5 minutes at every site, and so it's like a lot of data. We also were getting wind data all the time, so we were able to sort of figure out what's going on. We got traffic data from Department of Administration, so we were able to kind of look at the relationships. And I'm going to just give a couple of points from it, but it was actually a pretty extensive report that we put together, so if anybody's interested, it will be, it's not filed yet, but it will be, it will be available soon. So at the sites that are near the highway, as with the VOCs, the levels of both black carbon and particle count were much higher than at other sites, particularly during the daytime hours, and particularly on weekdays. So because we're getting these points all during the day, we can actually look at how things vary during the day. So maybe if we just go to the next slide. So this is at the Bay Street site, which is near the highway. So this is what it is during the weekday. This is just kind of an average over the year period by the time of day, and this is on weekends. This is for particle count. So during the day you get a whole lot higher levels of particle counts at Bay Street on a weekday and a weekend. And then this is the same scale at Urban Lake. You know, a little bump in the morning hours at Urban Lake of particle count, but nothing like what you see at Bay Street. And they're about half a mile from each other. Yeah, so and Urban Lake is about half a mile from the highway. And the same thing with black carbon. It's a pretty big bump in the middle of the day with Bay Street, and just a little bit at Urban Lake. And at the other sites that were near the highway, you see pretty much the same thing. The shapes are a little different, but you see that kind of elevation of all of them. These are a little bit maybe harder, but I like these kind of comparative things. So this is sort of wind direction from north to south, northeast, southwest. So Bay Street and Providence Hill Center are on the opposite side of the highway from each other. So, and this is particle counts. When the wind is from the east, then the levels are a lot higher. At Bay Street, when they're from a more westerly direction, they're a lot higher than Providence Hill Center. So that's particle count, and the same kind of pattern is true with black carbon. There are a bunch of factors that affect pollutant levels. These pollutant levels, it's not just the highway. In any given day, there are various things that can cause the pollutants to be higher or lower. Wind speed's really important. When there's not a lot of wind, you tend to have a lot higher levels of pollutants. Temperature affects the different pollutants in different ways. Benzene 1,2-butadiene and particle count are higher when it's colder, and the reverse is true with black carbon and some of the other VOCs. It's kind of a complicated relationship, but it is important in most cases. Wind direction, obviously, so if the wind's blowing from the highway towards the monitor, or if it's blowing from another source towards the monitor, then you're going to get higher levels than if it's not. Traffic, so if it's a time with this high traffic, you're going to get higher levels, particularly for black carbon and particle count. Truck traffic is particularly important. And then the distance and position relative to the highway, so whether or not, how far you are from the highway, whether you're level with the highway or above it, below it, are important. Whether or not there are obstacles like trees. Trees aren't the panacea, but they help somewhat. They can block some of the impacts. And then whether or not there are other emission sources around. So you can be away from the highway, but right next to another major emission source and get the same kind of impacts. So we also did these measurements with the portable equipment to just see how things change with distance, because you want to see sort of how exposures change as you move away from the highway. So at each site, each of the 5 sites, and then we actually added a couple of additional ones, we measured 3 or 4 locations at different distances from the highway once a month, both particle count and and black carbon, just to see how far the impacts extend. Particularly interesting one I thought was the Niagara Street one, because it's directly across from Roger Williams Park, and they had 3 sites that are there's the Niagara Street site, and then there's 2 others that were increasing distances from the highway, but then they continued that line across the highway to Roger Williams Park, so there were 3 sort of similar distances on the other side of the highway. So depending on what the wind direction was, you'd see whether the impacts were higher on one side or the other. And so this is just kind of an example, a little bit of picking data, but on this day, Roger Williams Park was downwind of the highway. The levels were obviously a lot higher. Highest at the one that was closest to the highway, and then lower at the ones that were a little farther away. But all of them were a lot higher than they were on the other side of the highway in Niagara. And kind of the reverse was true on this other day when Niagara Street was downwind and Roger Williams Park was upwind. It wasn't really impacted. I just wanted to quickly show make one point about the ones at the Providence Health Center. Providence Health Center, there are actually 2 locations that were fairly close to the highway, and then 2 that were kind of extending back. And this is Eddy Street over here, so it's Allen's Ave. So that's Allen's Ave, so that's obviously an area that has a lot of truck traffic as well. So on this day that was downwind of 95, you saw the same, that the 2 that were the closest to the highway at the highest levels, and then it dropped off its distance. This day, when it was actually the wind was coming from the east, so it wasn't coming from the highway. You actually had the highest levels at this one that was the furthest from the highway, and it's probably because of traffic on Allen's Ave. We saw the same thing with Bay Street, because it's sort of near Eddy Street, so some days you saw the effective traffic along Eddy Street on the measurements that were of the locations that were farther from the highway. Okay, so these are just the takeaway messages. One, that exposures to pollutants from motor vehicles increase the risk of a variety of diseases, and so you need to take them seriously, and it's particularly for children and people with lung diseases like asthma. That the levels are very high close to the highway of many pollutants. They fall off with distance, but the sort of the farthest away locations that we were measuring with the portable equipment was about 500 feet from the highway, and you're still seeing impacts at that location. Other sources are also important. So, like, if you can't just consider the highway, you also have to look at vehicles on other city streets, and you also have to look at stationary sources, industrial sources, commercial sources, boilers, and so forth, that affect air quality. And that we feel pretty strongly that when you're making decisions about locating schools and playgrounds and soccer fields and stuff like that, that you should consider these issues. Sometimes you may have to go with something that's not perfect anyway, but that should be a consideration when you are making decisions about where to put a building, or where to put a playground at a building relative to the building. Maybe if you could put it behind the building farther from the highway, you get an extra 100 feet or something. That's helpful. So maybe none of this is earth-shattering, but we just feel like it's important that these considerations be included in any kind of decision-making that particularly that involves children or people that may be sensitive.